After looking at Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights, I think it's safe to say that it's definitely possible to have a great game based on the Scooby-Doo franchise that's not only fun to play, but also authentic to the source material. While Night of 100 Frights was good, it did let me down in a few key areas, primarily with its basic platforming and its confusing level design, which made it sometimes very unobvious as to where you needed to go. 2 years after Night of 100 Frights, we were blessed with yet another Scooby-Doo game on the PS2, this time being Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem. This time around though, it wasn't developed by Heavy Iron Studios, but instead Artificial Mind and Movement. This company's history is a little bit confusing, because they've had a few name changes over the years, and then they've reverted back to their old names just to make things extra confusing. They were originally known as Behavior Interactive, and developed some pretty popular titles, such as Jersey Devil and Bugs Bunny Lost in Time. But they changed the name in the year 2000 to Artificial Mind and Movement, going on to create Bugs Bunny and Taz Time Busters, the Monsters Inc. Scream Team game, and of course, the game we're talking about today, Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem. Much more recently, the studio has been more interested in creating original IP and have developed several games you've probably heard of, from Wet, Naughty Bear, and the big one that's easily the most successful game with Dead by Daylight. In the year 2010, the company reverted back to its original name, so despite being known as Artificial Mind and Movement for a good 10 years, they're now once again known as Behavior Interactive. A bit of a confusing history, but there we go. Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem once again opens up with a reimagining of the iconic opening from the 1969 TV show, but I would actually argue that it doesn't look quite as good as it did in Night of 100 Frights. Something about it just looks a little bit more cheap. I think maybe it's the movement and facial animations just looking a little bit more stiff. But overall, this is still a nice touch, and it's interesting how they've used the monsters and environments featured in the game itself, rather than just using the ones from the TV show. The main menu is also a bit of a downgrade this time, being much more generic and not featuring any kind of interactive or dynamic backgrounds. You do get to see monsters popping out and Scooby and Shaggy running past every now and then, so it's not completely boring, but it's definitely not as good as getting to see the inside of the Mystery Machine. One positive here though is that once again there's quite a few extras here. You can watch a trailer for the second live action film that released in 2004, you can play minigames which are unlocked in the main game, you can look at artwork featuring concept art as well as in development shots of some of the environments, and there's also a model viewer too. While it is a shame that this is featured in the main menu this time, rather than being located in a physical place in the game, like with the Monster Gallery in Night of 100 Frights, it's still great that there's so much to look at here. The game opens with us seeing a security guard in a haunted library. He spots something and is scared off of the premises, and we then cut to the next day where the gang are talking about the next job. Mr. Dinsdale, the person in charge of the haunted library, has contacted Mystery Inc. about the issue he's having, and they head straight there and proceed to investigate. Straight away they're surprised by the fact that there seems to be actual ghosts and not just people in costumes. But they proceed to split up and look for clues regardless. Isn't it slightly strange how the gang are just so open and willing to accept the fact that there's real ghosts running around here? Then again, I guess this isn't the first time that they've experienced something like this. After all, they did see real ghouls and ghosts in the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo and Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. So I guess by this point, they're just used to seeing this sort of stuff. During the game we take control of Scooby and Shaggy and can swap between them at any point. For the most part, swapping the characters doesn't actually affect the gameplay at all, but it's just your preference as to which character you want to use. There's some infrequent sections where Scooby is able to crawl through little gaps which Shaggy can't do, but these sections are few and far between and are always really short. It's a bit weird how Shaggy doesn't have any kind of unique ability like that. I think maybe they could have done something like have Shaggy be able to reach places high up that Scooby can't or something. But yeah, this character swapping doesn't really matter because you're always being followed by the other character anyway. Again, another thing that most games do when there's two playable characters is have some puzzles where they need to split up and do things at the same time. Like one stands on a pressure pad which opens a door for the other character to go through or something. But this game doesn't actually ever do that, and you actually can't swap characters unless you're standing right next to the other character. So yeah, this is already one area of the game that I think could have been developed a little bit more. It basically feels like you're playing as a singular character, so being able to swap between Scooby and Shaggy really has no purpose. Something that's definitely worth pointing out here is that unlike with Night of 100 Frights, this time we have full 360-degree control over the camera. We're truly living in the future. The actual gameplay featured here is a little bit difficult to describe. You would assume, coming off of Night of 100 Frights, that this would be some kind of 3D platformer. But no, it actually isn't. In fact, it doesn't feature any platforming of any kind, and you don't even have the ability to jump. So what do you do? Well, you walk around and explore locations, finding clues, solving puzzles, and occasionally defeating different types of monsters. So it's like an exploration-based puzzle game, I guess? It's actually quite similar to Luigi's Mansion in a lot of ways, so if I had to compare it to anything, it would be that. The exploration is fairly linear, and there's clearly only ever one route to go in order to progress. Sometimes you'll come across a locked door or something else blocking your path, and that's when you'll need to either backtrack slightly in order to find a key, or you'll need to interact with something to solve a puzzle. So, for example, in this level you'll be walking around and coming across these pictures of numbered switches. At first it isn't apparent what you're supposed to do with these, but you'll eventually come across a drawbridge and gate that's blocking you from entering a castle. You'll then notice 4 switches which need to be pulled in a certain combination to allow access, and that's what the drawings you've been coming across are for. There's a good variety of puzzles too, and none of them are ever used more than a couple of times. So we have this room where you need to spin pipes in order to direct the flow of water to an endpoint which activates a fountain. Then there's this quite lengthy section set in this western themed area where you need to go on a big fetch quest and use items and keys in a variety of ways in order to unblock a tunnel to progress forward. So you find soap in order to make a cart slippery to move it and access a jail cell. You find a saw which allows you to cut through the bars into the next cell to get a key. You use the key to access a bank, which gives you a music note which you input into a piano in a saloon, which then gives you something else. And eventually you end up with a shovel which you use to remove the dirt that's blocking the tunnel. All of these types of puzzles are pretty good actually, and none of them outstay their welcome. While exploring and solving puzzles, you'll probably end up coming across some different types of collectibles. So first, there's the sandwich ingredients, and if you find all 5 of these, you unlock a mini-game to play, which can be accessed through the main menu. I must be a terrible gamer though, because I actually didn't manage to do this on any level, meaning that I didn't actually get to play any of the mini-games for myself. I have looked up what they're all about though, and it doesn't look like I was missing much. There's one where you need to make your way through a maze pushing rotating bookshelves which are blocking your path. One where you need to capture all of the monsters that you can within a time limit. One where you ride a minecart and see how far you can get. One that's a similar sort of thing, but this time you're on a motorbike. And then one where you need to scare scientists out of a room using an energy gun which slowly runs out of batteries. This is actually a pretty good reward for getting 100% on a level, but like I say, even though I was reasonably thorough, I never managed to do this. Oops. The other type of collectibles are the clues which you can find, which give you an indication of who the culprit is behind all of the spooky happenings in each level. Now this sounds pretty interesting, and I was thinking that maybe there would be some kind of LA noir setup going on where you had a lineup of suspects and based on the clues you gathered, you had to pick someone. But no, this isn't actually the case, and the resolution of each level just plays out in a cutscene. The clues you gather have no impact on the gameplay at all, and just unlock artwork for you to view on the main menu. This is a massive shame because having some kind of questioning phase at the end of each level would have made it feel more like you were a real detective. So basically, all of the collectibles in this game are completely optional, and you could finish the entire thing without having found a single one of them. That's a little bit disappointing, and it kinda makes the exploration feel a little bit shallow. The last element of gameplay is the combat, and this is probably where it feels the most like Luigi's Mansion. At the very start of the game, you're actually completely defenseless, and you just have to avoid the ghosts with an extremely basic stealth mechanic. You can sneak by holding down R1, and you can sometimes find disguises which make you completely undetectable, but are on a timer and run out fast. But really, it's just so much easier to run past everything and dodge their attacks that the stealth is completely pointless. This is funny because this was also an issue I had with Night of 100 Frights, so it's strange that this game has the same problem despite being pretty dramatically different in terms of gameplay. Eventually though, you gain access to the Tome of Doom, a book which has the ability to trap monsters in its pages. Certain types of monsters require a missing page of the book, but to be honest this never really affects anything too much because the page you need is always really close to the particular enemy that you need it for. So the way that the combat works is that you get close to a monster and open the book, which then starts pulling it in. You then need to mash a button in order to pull it in enough to trap it, and the longer it takes for you to do so, the lower the book's energy meter gets. You can refill the energy meter by finding these little orbs, or by standing next to these energy dispensers, which never run out. You get given so much energy for the book that I almost wonder what the point of it running out of power at all is. It almost feels like a bit of a waste of time because all running out means is that you have to retreat and refill your energy in the exact same room that you're already in. It's not like you need to conserve energy and only use it on the monsters who are the biggest threat or anything, because there's always more energy to find anyway. One of my biggest issues with the combat though is that for certain larger types of monsters, the button you need to mash during the pulling in phase will actually change. But the monster will also start struggling and attempt to attack you, which will stop you from being able to use the book temporarily if you're hit. The issue with this is that the button that you need to press is displayed in the corner of the screen, so you're having to constantly pay attention to that, but then the ghost will be attacking you at the same time and you won't see it coming because you're not looking at that part of the screen. Why couldn't they have made it so that the button prompt appeared above or next to the enemy that you were catching? That way you would have been able to have seen everything at the same time. Overall though, the combat here isn't absolutely terrible. It can get quite hectic when there's more than one enemy, and certain types of monsters later in the game will start reacting in different ways to the book. So for example, these mummies will attempt to run back inside of the coffins as soon as they see you open the book. So the strategy here is to bait them out and away from the coffin and then open the book and trap them before they can make it back to safety. Or there's also these flaming ghosts which are immune to the book if they can see you, so you need to obstruct the vision by using these water sprinklers and then use the book when they get close. There's even enemies like these zombies which attempt to spit weird gas at you when you're catching them, so the variety here is actually pretty great, both mechanically and visually. There's even some rare examples of human enemies which obviously can't be captured with the book. So the objective here becomes either to run away from them and avoid their attacks altogether, or in the case of the final level, there's actually a fairly lengthy sequence where you actually have to use stealth, because if you're spotted, you're taken back to the start of the area. Finally, a bit where the stealth mechanic is actually utilised. It is still fairly basic though, featuring a single section where you need to hide behind some crates and then slip past a guard, and then for the rest of it you'll have a disguise. So at that point it's functionally the same as just running past the enemies anyway. But still, credit where it's due, they did at least try and implement the stealth here. Now, you might be thinking that all of this sounds like it would get a little bit boring. We do have some attempt at variety here with the exploration, the combat and the puzzles, but it still sounds like it would be a little bit drab. And yeah. What, you was expecting me to say something else? Okay, yes, while the game is quite repetitive, there are some moments where it actually offers a certain type of gimmick section to spice things up. For example, there's a part where Scooby and Shaggy enter a cafeteria and play a game to see who can collect and eat the most food in a time limit. There's a bit where the duo are separated and Scooby has to use a lantern to explore a dark basement and find his friend before the oil runs out. There's a section where Scooby can swim around in a swamp and has to avoid alligators and people searching for you on boats. And there's two quite significant sections which feature vehicles. The first of these is a minecart section. Now, why is it that games like this always feature minecarts? I mean, where did that even start as a gaming trope? Was it Donkey Kong Country? This is seen a hell of a lot in both mainstream and niche titles, like we saw with the Hugo games, Lucky Luke, Crash Bandicoot, Yooka-Laylee, Resident Evil, Captain Toad, Croc, and probably way more. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just really interesting how this became such a staple of game design, despite it most of the time not being all that good. And yeah, surprise surprise, it isn't all that great here in Mystery Mayhem. The issue with it is that the obstacles come at you way too fast and can be placed just after sharp turns where you can't see what's coming up. It's mostly just trial and error getting through this, and it was one of the most annoying parts of the entire game. It doesn't help that the controls here are slightly delayed as well, so when you perform an action like jumping or tilting the cart, you can't then immediately do another action. It's like everything you do is on a short cooldown timer, despite the fact that there's often multiple obstacles placed quickly after each other. Very annoying. The second and last vehicle section is a little bit better because you have a lot more control over your movement with you not being locked onto a rail. And this one is the motorbike sequence. This is very similar to the minecart section really though, featuring loads of obstacles coming out of nowhere, splits in the path where one will be a dead end and you'll have no idea which way to take, really tight paths to balance on, and just loads of stuff getting in your way. The good thing here though is that at least you can slow down and control your movement a lot better. And there were moments here that I was actually enjoying this bit, it just needed less of these horrible dead ends. Just like with Night of 100 Frights, this game also features a laugh track during gameplay and cutscenes to bring it in line with the TV show. This time though, it's used much less frequently, and I actually think I prefer this. It does come across as a bit sinister though when you have a motorbike accident and the crowd erupts in laughter as you lie on the floor with broken bones. Now look, I think it's safe to say at this point that my opinion of this game isn't exactly the highest. After all, I've complained about practically every single aspect of it, and for good reason, because I genuinely do think that it's quite flawed. However, having said all of that, I can't bring myself to say that I outright hated this game, and I did actually enjoy my time with it. What I definitely did hate though, was this bit where the camera went through the back of Shaggy's head and we got to see the inside of his skull.
My appetite, almost.
Now if that isn't scary, then I don't know what is. One element of the game which stopped me from hating it is the fact that it's quite short and the episodic nature of its structure makes it easy to play for a short burst and then stop for a while before picking it up later. It's only about 5 hours long if you're just doing the main story like I was, so it definitely never outstays its welcome. At the same time though, it does have replay value with the optional collectibles, so if you did want to spend more time with it, the option is there for you to do so. I personally think that 5 hours is the perfect length for this though, and any longer and I probably would have gotten bored. Another thing that I liked about this game, probably over Night of 100 Frights actually, is the story. While it is still a little bit simple, there's way more going on here, and I actually found it quite interesting working out how everything was gonna connect in the end. Basically, the game consists of 5 levels, which are all about their own mysteries. However, there's an overarching mystery that connects all of them, and you learn more about what's going on as you progress through the game. Once again though, before I start ruining things, I feel like I should put a spoiler warning up here. Again, I don't know if this is entirely necessary because I doubt that anybody actually cares about the plot of a Scooby-Doo licensed game from 2004, but I want to be here for that one person who does care. So, skip to the time displayed on the screen now if you want to avoid any spoilers. Let's go. Basically, the overarching thing linking all of the mysteries you're solving here is a company called Greenwood. This company is using the pages of the Tome of Doom to spawn monsters and scare away the residents of certain locations. After these places have been abandoned, Greenwood will then swoop in and offer to buy them for a low price, and are using them to build these massive antennas. You later learn that Greenwood is owned by another company called Sherman Tech, and you head over to their headquarters, break into restricted areas, and learn that the reason that they're building these antennas is to mind control people into buying all of their products. After apprehending the CEO of the company though, his assistant gets away and reveals that it was her plan all along to use the mind control devices to take over the world. Of course, Scooby and Shaggy stop her in the end, and Sherman Tech's plans are halted. I liked how there was a bit more of an actual mystery going on here, and it was actually quite interesting piecing everything together. Like, the reason that this Sherman Tech company went to the library in the first level was obviously to steal the Tome of Doom, and that's why all of the ghosts were there. And then every subsequent location you visit is being used to build the antennas. I also liked how there was more of an actual threat this time. At one point, Daphne, Fred and Velma become mind controlled and you need to avoid them while powering down a machine. And of course there's also the fact that the villain this time is attempting to take over the world, which is way worse than what the mastermind was doing in Night of 100 Frights. Sure, it's more unrealistic, but it's a cartoon, so does that really matter? I would also say in general that this game has a better script and was more consistently funny than anything from Night of 100 Frights. It's nothing that got a belly laugh out of me, but it did get a nose breathe out of me.
Here you go, Velma.
Thanks, Shaggy. Hey, what's this?
It's a groovy old book me and Scoob found. And like when I say ghosts are into this book, I mean ghosts are into this book.
Another positive is that this probably does feel even more faithful to the TV show in terms of what you're actually doing. Like, the whole premise of the TV show is that they're splitting up and looking for clues, solving puzzles and avoiding monsters, and that's exactly what you do in this game. It also features all of the same voice actors from Night of 100 Frights reprising their roles, apart from the voice of Velma, who changed from BJ Ward to Mindy Cohn. Mindy Cohn being the voice actress who voiced Velma in the What's New Scooby-Doo TV show. I also liked how there was a much greater emphasis on visual variety here. While I would probably argue that overall this game doesn't look as good as Night of 100 Frights in terms of sheer graphical quality, there's definitely a lot more going on in Mystery Mayhem, and I think that variety makes it stand out a bit more. Like, you have the haunted library, which is fairly standard, but then you go to a movie studio and go to sets based on medieval periods, space, Egypt, graveyards and Rome. Then the next level is a haunted swamp, we have a western level, and finally a high-tech laboratory level. It's actually really great, and I enjoyed exploring all of these locations quite a lot. At the end of each of these levels, we also have some form of boss battle that takes place, and once again, these are actually all pretty awesome. The first one involves you having to capture all of the ghosts in a room in the library, but in order to get more energy for the Tome of Doom, you need to find the fake ghost who turns out to just be a man running around in a bedsheet. The second boss is probably my favourite, being this Crash Bandicoot style boulder chase sequence, where instead of a boulder, it's a guy dressed in a knight costume. And he's actually really fast too. The idea here is that Fred will activate a drawbridge with the knight on it after you've lured him across. But of course the plan doesn't work and Fred doesn't know how to operate the bridge properly. This is a really good throwback to how his plans never work in the TV show. The third boss is a bit more lame, just being this tornado monster which separates itself into smaller tornadoes, which you then catch just like with the normal enemies. The fourth boss is against a huge zombie monster, and despite being big, this is another one that's actually maybe a little bit boring. Again, just having you capture it like you would with any standard enemy, only with more health. Then the final boss is again another quite good one, having one phase where you need to turn water jets on by turning valves, but the catch is that the valves are hidden behind hedges, which you need to burn down by getting the ghost to throw a fireball at you and then dodging out of its way. Then the second phase is once again just a simple catch-in sequence. But still, the first phase was interesting at least, and I'm glad they had some interesting concepts for some of the bosses here. So yeah, despite Mystery Mayhem not being amazing or anything, I did actually end up enjoying my time with it, and it was fun playing a game that doesn't really fit into a particular genre. Like, what would you actually call this game? I wouldn't go as far as to say it was a puzzle game, because it's not all about the puzzles. So maybe it's an exploration game, or maybe it's an adventure game. I don't really like putting games into that category though, because it's just a little bit vague. Like, surely practically every single game ever made features some kind of adventure, right? Mystery Mayhem lacks the visual polish of Night of 100 Frights, but it has a much better story, way more varied gameplay and environments, and arguably is even more faithful to the source material. It could be considered quite boring though, and some of the gimmick sections, like with the vehicles, are frustrating to get through. Once again, the stealth elements are a little bit underbaked, but they are much more utilised than in Night of 100 Frights, so at least it has that going for it. Plus, there wasn't really any moments where I got lost and couldn't progress for ages, so it's definitely overall less frustrating than Night of 100 Frights. The main thing that's better about Night of 100 Frights is just the fact that its gameplay is more dynamic and interesting, with it being a platformer with more of a fast-paced action focus. Here though, with Mystery Mayhem, we have a much slower paced game, which is probably less flawed overall, but is also potentially more uninteresting. It's really difficult to say which is better honestly, but if I had to pick, I would probably say Mystery Mayhem. That's definitely entirely subjective though, and I would imagine a lot of people would probably disagree with me just because they prefer the genre of Night of 100 Frights. But that's Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem. Now the final game that we're going to be looking at in this year's Scooby-Doo-a-Thon is the third Scooby-Doo game released on the PS2, which is Scooby-Doo Unmasked. I kind of hope that this one goes back to being more of a typical 3D platformer, to be honest, because, once again, this is developed by Artificial Mind and Movement, and I know for a fact that they can do that genre well. I mean, we're talking about the company that made the Monsters Inc. game and Bugs Bunny Lost in Time, and I can vouch for both of those being pretty good. But who knows, maybe with this we'll get something completely different and it'll take us all by surprise. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to see the next Scooby-Doo video coming out next week, and leave a comment down below letting me know if you ever played Mystery Mayhem and what you thought about it. And until the next video, bye!